evening to everyone, and welcome to this RCM session where I'll be sharing to you my Christian faith and the profession that I'm in as a forester. So to start with, I'd like to share my screen with you. Okay, I hope you can see my screen well and good. Okay, so just like what I've said, I'll be sharing with you my Christian faith and my journey as a forester. But specifically, I'll be focusing on the intelligent design behind forests and trees. My specific field of specialization in forestry is actually silviculture, and that simply is how trees and forests are planted and grown. But I'll not be talking about hardcore silviculture, but mainly touching on some portions of the basic science that silviculture is founded because of the limited time. But of course, trying to establish really that indeed God, who is the creator of heaven and earth, have created the forest and even the science that I am practicing. My presentation would cover the following, very briefly looking at how much forest that we have in the Philippines and what benefits that we have from our forest. We'll have a real quick look at the list of trees that are described, mentioned in the Bible, short description of forests in the Bible, but not really looking at the intricate details of this. And for this particular talk, there would just be selected aspects only of forestry, focusing mainly on selected tree plant processes because of the time limit. And the focus, just like what I've said, would be mainly on the intelligent design of trees and the processes that we can find in trees, as well as the so-called irreducible complexities that we can find in trees, as well as the processes in trees. And I'll conclude this talk with a tale of 3 trees. Now, to start with, what forests do we have in our country? Exactly 500 years ago, when the Spaniards came, that was in March 1521, we have almost the whole Philippines is covered by forest. So we have almost 90% of our forest, of our whole total land area as forest land. Yan po ay noong 1521, nung dumating ang mga Espanyol. Pero come the 20th century, it has already we have already lost almost around 10 million hectares, but that's in the span of 4 centuries, almost 4 centuries. But for that, for the 20th century, that's about more than 100 years up to our present period, we have significantly lost much of our forest. And in fact, we just have something like 23% of our forest land. So from something like almost 97%, we're down to 23% to something like 7 million hectares. But that won't be the focus of my talk. Brother Rex Cruz would be talking about this natural resource conservation, including forest ecosystem next week. But of course, I'd like to briefly mention to you, and I'm sure some of you might know that our forest provides us with a variety of ecosystems, goods, and services. Napakaraming produkto at serbisyo ang nakukuha natin sa ating kagubatan mula sa hangin, sa tubig. I don't have to enumerate all of them. You can see them here in the picture, and there are lots of products and even food that we can get from our forest. Even our mangrove forest is a very important ecosystem that provides us a variety of ecosystems, goods, and services that serves humanity. For example, in climate regulation, it's very important. It's one of the, we can consider as one of those which stores a large amount of carbon, which is very important as we consider global warming or climate change, which have been previously discussed also by, I think, Brother Rex. And of course, there's this fisheries, tourism, water filtration, coastal protection, etc. And looking at another illustration of how forest helps us, we have so-called provisioning services, regulating services, cultural services, and supporting services, all of which you can see a number of benefits that society is able to avail from well-managed sustainable forest ecosystems. Now, starting in the Bible, Genesis 1, particularly verse 11 to 13, it says, and God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. Of course, any unbelieving scientist would say, well, that's what the Bible says. And of course, that's your belief. And of course, this is not what we would want to focus mainly in this discussion, but just like what I've said, we'll be focusing on intelligent design and irreducible complexity. But just trying to survey the Bible, the Old and New Testament mentioned around 36 trees. We won't go over them one by one because the Bible is not really a botanical textbook. So modern tree identification accuracy is not relevant. But just to cite some of them, acacia is a tree mentioned more than 26 times in the Bible. And this is actually the shita tree, which produced the shittim wood associated with building the Ark of the Covenant and its incense altar. There's also the so-called Jericho balsam, or desert date or balm. And of course, we are familiar with this so-called balm of Gilead. There's also this Boswellia carteri or frankincense, olibanum. This tree generates a resin product famous for its smell when burned and for its medicinal and cosmetic use. There's also this so-called Cedrus libani, or the cedar of Lebanon. Of course, we see this mentioned several times in the Old Testament. There's likewise the so-called Ficus carica, or the fig tree, which grew large lobe leaves. Malaking mga dahon yun, ano? And this was, of course, used by our first parents when they realized that they were naked in the Garden of Eden after they sinned, and they covered themselves, their human parts. But accordingly, this fig tree, the leaves caused dermatitis, and you could just imagine the discomfort of Adam and Eve with this covering that they have. And it was so gracious of our Lord that he provided to them animal skin for covering, which is of course much better than this dermatitis causing leaf. Several forests cited in the Bible. The house of the forest of Lebanon was probably Solomon's armory, and was called because of the wood of its many pillars, which came from Lebanon, and it has the appearance of forest. The Hebrew Horesh, denoting a thicket of trees, underwood, jungle, bushes, or trees entangled, which could afford a safe hiding place. As mentioned in Chronicles, it was also rendered as wood, or wood in the wilderness of Sif, in which David concealed himself when he was running away from Solomon. Also, there is this Hebrew pardes, which means enclosed garden or plantation. Asaph in Nehemiah is called the keeper of the king's forest, and also referring to orchards. Now let's go to what is really the main focus of this talk, which is intelligent design. And there's this excellent book by Law, Evolution, and Intelligent Design in a Nutshell. And it defines intelligent design as follows. The theory of intelligent design holds that certain features of the universe and living things are best explained by an intelligent cause rather than by purely undirected natural processes, which actually is the way that evolutionists, mainly atheists, are trying to explore, or rather explain, how life came into this world. So intelligent design is claiming that there is an intelligent cause. And in a broader sense, intelligent design is the science of design detection, and it involves recognizing patterns that have been arranged by an intelligent agent for a purpose. So this particular science really looks at these patterns that we can see in nature, and of course look at particular purposes of why we have such a particular, say, structure, or why there is a particular process. Intelligent design is restricted to scientific evidence. So actually what we'll be focusing mainly here are science processes, science procedures, science protocols. So because we would want to really explain, and I want to explain my profession, actually the basic science of my profession, in terms of its scientific basis, and relating it to an intelligent designer. Of course, I'll be referring back to what Brother Deacon Glenn has discussed 2 Tuesdays ago about the DNA. But let me start with one very common process, and that is photosynthesis and respiration, which I'm sure many of you who have taken basic biology or botany are all familiar with. Light energy in the presence of carbon dioxide, CO2, and water would produce glucose and oxygen. I'm sure many of us knows that photosynthesis is the major supplier of organic compounds used in the synthesis of other compounds such as carbohydrates and proteins, which are very important as far as our food is concerned, and even food of other animals. It is estimated that over 100 billion metric tons of sugar, or that is carbohydrates, are produced annually by photosynthesis. Photosynthesis also converts about 1,000 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide into organic matter each year. And that's why it's very important as far as climate change is concerned, because it can sequester this much carbon dioxide. And this sequestration of the plants of carbon dioxide yields about 700 billion metric tons of oxygen. And I don't have to discuss why oxygen is very important. So this is the simple equation for photosynthesis, as simple as light, carbon dioxide, and water producing glucose or sugar and oxygen. Now let's look at the structure, the leaf by which photosynthesis takes place. So we see here the leaf, but let's go down to the cellular level where photosynthesis takes place. Plant cells contain chloroplasts. Okay, so we'll be very technical here because we're really talking about science. So if you still remember your basic biology, so chloroplast, and this chloroplast enabled them to store light energy as chemical energy. So this is one actually of the marvels, let's say the marvels of science, but the marvels of creation, because how could light energy be converted into chemical energy? And it's only plants that who could do that. If we go on sunbathing, we get sunburn. We don't produce we don't produce carbohydrates. We don't get our food out of sunbathing. But plants, when they are exposed to sun, they are able to trap that light energy and convert it to chemical energy. And you can see here the structures. I won't go anymore to the details of this, but there are these cells that you can see there shown in your screen. Likewise, if we look at light, of course, we can only see the visible light. I'm sure you're familiar with the rainbow color VibGyor, okay, or Roy GB, whichever is your however you would want to memorize it, or how you have memorized it previously. But this is what you can only see. And this light that God created, because God created light. He said, let there be light. And it is composed of both all of this visible light and there are this short wavelength light and the long wavelength. But let's not be too technical about that. But the point here is that light is an electromagnetic energy occurring as waves, and chlorophyll absorbs this light most strongly in the blue and red regions. Okay, so that's what is being absorbed. And the green light actually is reflected. That's why we see the leaves as green. Okay. Now, looking more closely at the process of photosynthesis, it involves really capturing the light. So this is where light is captured over here. So this is the structure in your leaf when it's captured by the chlorophyll. So we have electrons getting excited when light energy is received by this chlorophyll. There is the capture of this light energy, and it causes the splitting of water. And let's see that in the next slide. No? So there's the splitting of the water, and that's why water is actually very important for life. Again, there's the question, who made water? And we know that, of course, the Bible will say that God made the water, but of course, the evolutionists will not admit that. But we have to see this as part of the intelligent design, that water was also placed there, because the water that is being absorbed by plant is actually the one that provides us oxygen. So doon sa equation ng photosynthesis, CO2 plus H2O, it's the oxygen in the water that is the oxygen that is being released. And this is because this happens when the electrons gets excited after being hit by the light photon. And you have here the so-called Z reaction, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. That this is so-called the light reaction, if you still remember your basic photosynthesis. And it produces this very important molecule NADPH, which is a reducing agent that we will see later as being used. Okay, now this is the so-called Calvin cycle. I won't go over them, but the idea here is that ATP and NADPH, which were produced from the light-dependent reactions, are used to attach to the CO2, to a 5-carbon ribulose molecule. And then the 6-carbon molecule form immediately breaks down into 2 carbon molecules, etc. No? So hindi ko na po kayo, I won't belabor you so much with all this reaction, but for those among you who have studied photosynthesis and the details of this reaction, there are enzymes. No? There are enzymes in each of these steps. And as Brother Glenn have explained, these enzymes are produced by proteins, and these proteins have been produced by the RNA, which have been translated from the DNA. And I'll go back again to that DNA stuff, but we know that that's very, very important information as far as life is concerned. But what you can see here is really the complexity of this particular reaction that we see in plants in photosynthesis. And this complexity should really amaze us, because this doesn't just happen by chance. Now, looking at it from a summary manner, okay, so you remember that light energy has been captured and it has been converted to carbohydrate by this chloroplast, okay? Now, this particular carbohydrate could go into a process called respiration, which is composed of glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport system. That's the aerobic cellular respiration. It's when we breathe and we hydrolyze our glucose to produce energy. That is specifically adenosine triphosphate, which could result into the production of cell work. Kaya tayo nakakatrabaho, kaya tayo nakakagawa. Even the breathing of our heart, no, the functioning of our brain should be sustained by this ATP. But of course, hindi yan galing dito sa hindi galing nung tayo nag-photosynthesize, dahil we cannot photosynthesize. We consume, we consume food which has carbohydrates so that we can get ATP, so that our cells could work. But the marvel here, hindi na natin tinignan, napaka-komplikado rin ng reaction that you can find in glycolysis and even Krebs cycle and the electron transport system. You see also a myriad of enzymes. At itong mga enzymes na to, just like what we have said previously, are proteins that have been translated from RNA, that has been translated from the DNA that came from our genes in the chromosome. Okay, so that's photosynthesis. Now, there are times, particularly both in the tropics and in the temperate regions, where we experience so-called hot and dry spells. And that's when these plants, you would see them turning brown, especially during summer, where there is a dry heat wave. And the so-called C3 plants resort to so-called photorespiration. And what is that? This is what you see here. Photorespiration, which occurs during drought and dry weather. And this is a process by which the stomates would close so that they conserve water. Well, evolutionists, naturalists would say, oh, that's adaptation. But it's so mind-boggling that there is such a enzyme that is called ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase, which is the one that we just saw in photosynthesis, but it also has another function as an oxygenase for the photorespiration. No? So we can see here, nahandon yung dilemma nitong Rubisco. Rubisco yan, hindi po Rebisco, yung biscuit, ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase, for short, Rubisco. There is that dilemma para doon sa enzyme. Ano ba, magfa-function ba ako carboxylase to fix carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, or would I function as oxygenase for the photorespiration during times of dry heat wave or drought or dry weather? Of course, naturalists and evolutionists would say it's adaptation, but it's so hard, and I will show you later an example of the structure of this Rubisco, and you can just see, how complicated it is, and it's just so mind-boggling how this would just came about by chance, random, blind, unguided natural selection. Anyway, another adaptation by plants would be the so-called crassulacean acid metabolism, or CAM, which is the photosynthesis of cactuses, or those plants in very dry or arid environments, particularly in the desert. So hindi sila pwedeng mabukas ng stomates nila, doon pumapasok ang carbon dioxide during the day, otherwise they get dehydrated because of the hot weather and the excessive heat that you have in a desert. No? Kaya merong ganitong klaseng photosynthetic system. At sasabihin na naman ng evolutionist adaptation. But again, if we try to look at the enzymes, there is this PEP carboxylase, phosphoenol pyruvate carboxylase, which is another enzyme na meron itong halaman na to. Paano siya nagkaroon? No? Ang sasabihin na naman ng evolutionist is natural adaptation. But again, I would argue that hindi pwede kasi enzymes are coded by DNA, and DNA are information. And information, I have to mention it at this point na, no? It has been emphasized by Brother Glenn. Information is a product of the mind, product of intelligence. And that couldn't be a product of random, blind, unguided natural selection. And this is just a typical example. Another type of photosynthetic process which is used by some plants is the so-called C4. And in this case, it concentrates CO2. You know that CO2 is very little in our air. No? Hindi pwedeng madami, although they're saying that there's increase in carbon dioxide that results to climate change. Hindi natin pwedeng hingahin ang CO2. We're breathing something like 19% oxygen, hindi pure oxygen. 71% is nitrogen. And even that mixture of air, no? 71% nitrogen, 19% lamang ang oxygen, that couldn't come by chance. Sinasabi ng evolutionist, nag-evolve yan sa ganang level. Paano mag-evolve sa ganang level? It's so mind-boggling that we see this kind of mixture of air. Alam natin na hindi pwede ring pure air or 100% oxygen ang mundo, kasi pag ganun ang nangyari, pag ang mundo ay 100% oxygen, nung nadiskubre ng tao ang apoy, ay nasunog na ang buong mundo. Hindi na natin inabot. So that's why 71% of the air is nitrogen. It's non-combustible compared to the combustible oxygen. But anyway, kukunti lang yung carbon dioxide, and these C4 plants are able to concentrate them. Okay. We have to appreciate also that we are in a fine-tuned universe. So delicately balanced are the laws, constant and initial conditions that small changes would be catastrophic to life. That is, they seem to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life. This realization has reshaped the way scientists view the universe. The universe is governed by 4 fundamental forces: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. I won't be able to discuss this because I myself am not a physicist who could really discuss this in detail, but just to cite what has been cited by Lewis and Barnes in The Fortunate Universe, Life in a Finely Tuned Cosmos. They said that if the fundamental force of gravity were somewhat stronger, stars would burn hotter, emitting far more sterilizing X-ray, gamma rays, photons, rendering the surface of a planet like Earth uninhabitable. So kung nabago lamang ng mas malakas ang atin daw force of gravity, hindi tayo mabubuhay. No? In fact, the sun would burn out itself too quickly long before life had time to arise and diversify on one of its planets. In fact, as the Lewis and Barnes explained, if gravity were 1,035 instead of 1,040 times weaker than the strong force, then the window would close completely and stable stars would not be possible at all. Okay, so that's just part of the fine-tuned universe in terms of the gravity, but that is related particularly in terms of temperature. Now, the irreducible complexity, which I mentioned, this is the structure of the rubisco, the ribulose phosphate carboxylase oxygenase that I was telling you. Hindi po siya ribbon na pinagkulay-kulayan lamang at pinagdugtong-dugtong at gagamitin sa party. This is the complicated enzyme that catalyzes the carboxylation of CO2, the fixation of CO2 in plants, kaya nangyayari, kaya tayo nakakaproduce ng glucose, or the oxygenation in photosynthesis that conserves water for some of the plants during dry and hot weather. Now, irreducible complexity says that a single system, be it that photosynthesis that we talk about, the photorespiration, the crassulation acid metabolism, the C4, the C3 photosynthesis, or even this structure of ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase, or the myriad of enzymes that we have in plants. No? So the single system, which is composed of several well-matched po sila, interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes system to effectively cease functioning. So napakahalaga po ng bawat sistema. No? So for example, this enzyme, Rubisco, di ba nakita natin doon kanina sa Calvin cycle, napakaraming enzyme. Doon din sa glycolysis, sa Krebs cycle, hindi na natin tinignan yung biochemical reaction on, but there are so many enzymes there. And it's just so unthinkable how these enzymes would come into being without an intelligent cause. Okay, now moving on, ito naman ang paliwanag ng mga evolutionists sa photosynthesis. They use the word, halimbawa tulad niya, no, it is likely that green plants evolve after the first living cells. It was talking about the earth when it was young. Electrical storms and solar radiation probably provided energy. So puro hindi nila alam. The first living cells probably evolved from these complex molecules. There was even the mention of accidental joining, condensation of amino acid glycine and fatty acid acetate. Biro niyo yun, no? Accidental joining, so magdudugtong. Yung pinakikita nga nating structure ng mga enzyme, they are very specific. And accidental joining, parang napakahirap mangyari nun. Ano? In fact, it would be billions and billions in terms of probability bago mangyari yung mga yon. And yet, naturalists, secular humanists, evolutionists keep insisting that there was this very fortunate daw na pangyayari, nagkadugtong-dugtong yan. No? So hindi na po natin iisa-isahin, but these are just examples of how evolutionists reason. No? Okay, let me just show you. Look at the forest. No? Look at the structure of these trees, the colors, how the various trunks of the trees are shaped, magkakaiba, hindi pare-pareho. The color of the leaves changing, the flowers having different morphology and anatomy, and yet they keep still saying, the naturalists, the evolutionists keep saying na nagkaroon lamang ng chance. Paano sila magkakaiba-iba? Paano sila nagkahiwa-hiwalay? Nag-usap-usap lang sila. Ako, gusto ko maging dilaw, ikaw maging pula, ikaw maging berde. But that's so difficult, and it's really so unscientific, I would say. Look at this different structure of these different trees. Magkakaibang puno. They have different anatomical features. The thorns are even defense mechanism for some of the predators that would be attacking it. Again, sasabihin niyan, adaptation. No? Yeah, it's adaptation. I believe in adaptation, the microevolution, if that would be the term for it, but it's adaptation to the environment where it is in. But I don't believe the macroevolution that life just sprout out of nothing. Now, looking at the largest tree, which is the giant sequoia, it's called General Sherman. It has the largest tree has about 1,487 cubic meters. And the volume is just like 1.68 of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Ganong karami, ganong kalaki ang volume na kayang hawakan nitong largest tree na to. Bakit may napakalaking puno? Bakit mayroong pandak na puno? Bakit may maliit na halaman? Again, I would attribute that to the DNA that they have, kasi yun lamang ang kanyang maximum na pwede niyang gawin. No? Looking at it, example, the genes in black cottonwood poplar, Populus trichocarpa. It has more than 45,000 genes. And by the way, poplar is the E. coli of the foresters. No? If they do genetic studies, ito yung pinakasimple, 45,000 genes lamang. Napakadami na niyan. But of course, no, even with this mind-boggling number of genes, we have to attribute these genes to make the proteins. They are the templates for the proteins, so that the sophisticated molecules can build and maintain the organism like a tree. So iba ang genes noong sequoia na nakita natin kanina, iba sa poplar, at hindi pwede silang magkapare-pareho. Of course, may mga magkakamag-anak, pero alam natin na hindi basta-basta nagkakahalo-halo yung mga puno na yan. But of course, evolutionists would say nagkaroon ng mga mutations, and these mutations have changed this information. But Dr. Lee Spechner has said that not even one mutation has been observed that adds a little information to the genome. At alam natin, plants and trees have unique anatomy and morphology. May chlorophyll, may roots, may stems, may leaves. Ang iba ang elepante, iba ang giraffe, iba ang bacteria, and they have different DNA, no? So kung babalikan nga natin itong DNA na to, no? This DNA is translated into a protein, no? Dito sa translation, no? Transcription muna. So parang yung information niya, yung pinaliwanag ni Deacon Glenn last time, no? Yung pinaliwanag niyang pag-transcribe ng information, yung ATGC na amino acids yan. Kung ano yung amino acids na yan, binubuo, nakakabuo ng proteins. Yan yung enzymes. Yung nakita natin kanina na parang ribbon na very colorful. This complex information like DNA, as I've said a while ago, is a product of intelligence, no? Information is a product of intelligence. Hindi pwedeng ang information ay galing kung saan na lamang. And I hope, I believe that meron tayong magiging resource person later about information and communication. And definitely, no, information which is a product of an intelligent mind could not result from blind and guided natural selection. Take another case, delivering up water to a tree via yung napakataas na puno. The highest tree, ang pinakamataas po is 115.54 meters. That is the coastal redwood in California, and that represents something like 28-story building high. Ganun kataas. Paano tumataas ang tubig doon? Iniigiban, may elevator ba siya? There's this so-called water potential. But again, sasabihin na naman evolutionists, ganun nga, nag-combine ng water vapor, may transpiration, there is this gradient of water potential, kaya tumataas ang tubig doon sa taas. And that's really the potent force that moves water up in trees. Pero I still hold on to the belief that the intelligent designer created water vapor, created this water gradient potential in the soil, in the trunk and in the leaves, so that water could go up even as high as a 28-story building. Okay, we should marvel at the oldest tree, 4,852-year-old, the Great Basin bristlecone pine, Pinus longavia. Kaya nga longavia siya. Ang tawag sa kanya ay Methuselah. Yan ang pangalan niya, no? Nasa California siya. But of course, we just see here, no? Dito nga natin makikita na parang dito natin makikita na hindi pa talaga napakatanda ng mundo. Okay? Now, have you ever gone hiking in a forest? I'm sure many of you have so. And if so, more likely you found yourself surrounded by still calmness that only trees can bring. Look at that serene pictures of the forest that you can see. Birds are probably singing. Some small mammals may be scurrying about. The forest may have felt so peaceful that it appeared as though nature performed this task easily, or this work easily. Parang simpleng-simple sa kanya na panatiliin niya yung kapayapaan, yung pag-agos ng tubig, yung pagtubo niya. Nobody sees when a tree bears the bud, or when the bud turns to a flower and ripens to a fruit, or when the seed falls, it germinates, grows to a seedling, a sapling, a pole, or to a mature tree. And later, when a tree dies, in most cases, nobody witnesses it. But on and on, this processes proceeds almost clockwork precision. But the vastness of life surrounding you was being sustained by physical laws so precisely tuned that if they had been varied from their current strengths, even a little, neither you nor the life surrounding you could exist. So I'd like to just more or less summarize what I have told you about intelligent design. The theory of intelligent design holds that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by intelligent cause rather than purely undirected natural processes. So I have given you some examples of this. The distinguished astronomer Fred Hoyle has famously said that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics. Pinaglaruan daw, tampered with physics. And by the way, Hoyle wasn't religious and even resisted the idea of a cosmic beginning. It would seem that he was driven by the evidence alone to concede that fine-tuning strongly suggests a cosmic fine-tuner. And Earth had all the right stuff for an ecosystem brimming with living things strange and wonderful. And without precision tuning at the level of cosmology, physics, chemistry, and geology, such life wouldn't be possible. And that's what we saw in all of this forest. Let me close with this tale of three trees. Tatlong puno. Let me start with Genesis 2:17. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. We're all familiar with this commandment of our Almighty God to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And deceptive Satan tempted our first parents. The attraction, of course, of being like God caught Adam and Eve. And of course, we do know and remember that there were lots of fruits in the garden. They can eat everything except this one. And this was the only tree that God instructed them not to eat. But just like any deceptive and alluring temptations, and with Satan probably badgering them, it became so attractive to eat. And sin entered into the world. Death was the result. Kamatayan po ang naging resulta. And it's not just the physical death, but it's the spiritual death of being separated from God because of sin. And we know that sin became part of man. It was imputed to man, and it became our greatest problem. Sin was our greatest problem. At ito po ang laking problema natin, gawa po ng punong ito. Pero meron din pong isang puno sa Biblia. It's found in Galatians 3:13. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree. Death is the curse because of sin. The wrath of God because of sin is what man should receive. And we don't have peace in this life because the wrath of God is on us. But there is this other tree. Meron po yung isang puno na to where Christ was crucified, and because he was crucified on behalf of sinners, Christ, the sinless Son of God, became a curse for us, that if we would turn to him in faith and repentance, we could be saved from the eternal curse. And let this be an invitation for those among you who are still under God's curse, that Christ became our Redeemer and has been a curse for us to save us from our sin. And the last tree is found in Revelations 22:2. In the midst of the street of it, and in either side of the river was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for healing of the nation. So this is the picture of the new heavens and the earth to come. The tree of life once banned to guilty humanity. Alam natin na pinagbawal na baka makain pa raw yan ni Adam and Eve so that they can live eternally. So nilagyan ng ating Panginoong Diyos ng harang ng isang anghel, ang Garden of Eden. But in here, in the new heavens and the new earth, we have this tree of life that could be eaten by those who are redeemed, and this would cause true healing for the nations. And with that, I open now for questions and comments for this lecture. Thank you very much.